The process of writing this address today was much more difficult and exacting than I had anticipated it would be. It involved all of the usual pitfalls of writing: distraction, avoidance, worry, excessive cleaning, etc. But for this particular occasion, I have found myself nearly incapacitated as a writer, not simply staring at a blank page, but incapable of opening up my notebook in the first place. And having finally opened up that notebook, throwing out all of my progress multiple times before accepting that at the end of the day, I was going to have to say something up here to all of you. At the moment of writing this introduction, I'm not even sure that what I've already drafted will end up getting used after all. But I like writing introductions, and sometimes you just need to take the small writing victories when and where you can. In hindsight, I shouldn't have been surprised by the difficulties I have faced in putting my words together for today. After all, I'm here to talk about the material impacts of targeted online harassment campaigns, using my own experiences as a victim of one of these campaigns to illustrate my point. And the process of writing this has involved having to return to the files of hate mail and outrage that were directed at me. In doing so, I'm reminded of the point that I want to make today, a point that I had, honestly, nearly forgotten because of these distractions. That point is this: we are, all of us, human. As far as Profound Rhetoric Conference keynote address themes go, "We are all human" probably ranks up there with "language is important" and "writing is recursive" in the pantheon of painfully obvious platitudes. It feels more like the kind of theme a large-scale conference might choose in order to feel specific, while still allowing everyone the latitude to propose what they were going to write anyway. I'm not even planning to complicate the terms, so to speak, by asking us to reconsider what we mean by human. I'll leave that to the object-oriented ontologists and the posthumanists, many of whom I consider dear friends, even though I rarely understand a word they say. No, when I say that we are all of us human in the context of discussing online communication, I really just mean it at that level. We are all of us human. In fact, I think it bears repeating. We are, all of us, human. We breathe, we eat, we cry, we laugh, we wallow. We avoid writing our conference papers until the night before we deliver them. We are, all of us, human. The reason I feel the need to state this so directly is that, despite its obviousness, I don't believe that we always interact with each other as humans, particularly online. Rather, for better or worse, we have turned each other into avatars, representing something other than ourselves. I don't know why this has happened, or when, but I do know that, having been on the receiving end of a deluge of digital viscera, it can be very difficult to recover one's humanity when it has been rhetorically denied you. This talk, then, is one that I feel deep in my body, in my matter. Writing this has been like cutting myself open, pulling open the folds of skin and time and scar tissue that have formed over my experiences into calcifications and trigger points, lurking sometimes just beneath the surface, tweaking and twinging when touched. It is this physical, emotional, and psychic experience that forces me to attempt a reckoning of our online lives. And so that, I suppose, is why it has been so difficult to write this keynote. Having gone through the dehumanizing process of doxing and targeted harassment, I have quickly realized how tenuous the link between my personal and professional identities really is. And when the subject of my writing is suddenly much more explicitly myself, I have come to understand how disorienting the process of writing is when you find yourself without the vocabulary to describe a subject that is both intensely personal and aggravatingly foreign at the same time. How exactly does one defend an avatar? Even an avatar that looks remarkably like oneself. It is this question and others like it that motivate me to speak with you today. So, to begin, and because I know more than half of you are wondering what the hell I'm talking about, I want to start with a story of my own experience with targeted cyber harassment. In late September of 2017, I woke up to find that my Facebook inbox had suddenly been flooded by a large number of messages from strangers. When I checked my email, I saw that I had started receiving several unsolicited messages there, too. Soon, I was able to figure out why. A year earlier, in the immediate aftermath of the 2016 presidential election, I had met with a group of queer and transgender students who I mentored as part of our university's LGBTQ residential learning community. I comforted these young adults, who were justly terrified in light of the transphobic and anti-queer language that surrounded them, both on campus and in their homes, and I was filled with an immediate and very righteous sense of anger. After class, I sat down to Facebook and composed a post rejecting what I saw as a form of concern trolling from the right that demanded both sides come together in unity to support the country. When my students break down crying because they were worried that the way they dressed that morning might end up getting them killed, I wrote, "Then you can take your well-meaning concern trolling and shove it up your ass. Fuck Donald Trump. Fuck anyone who voted for Donald Trump. Fuck anyone who tries to explain to me the real needs of people who voted for Donald Trump. Fuck anyone who tells me this is a class issue when working class people of color, working class queers, and working class immigrants weren't dazzled by Trump's tell it like it is rhetorical handjobs. Fuck anyone who tries to pretend that this was not white supremacy, misogyny, anti-Semitism, trans-misogyny, and heterosexism voting with their pussy-grabbing fingers. Fuck anyone who comes at me saying I'm being disrespectful right now. Fuck anyone who tries to sell me some line about coming together. We are together over here, and you are no longer welcome." The post, which got a few likes and comments from friends, sat unnoticed for almost a year. Then, a student enrolled in one of my first-year writing classes took it upon herself to search for evidence of liberal bias in my personal social media accounts, screenshotted this post, and sent it to a waiting army of alt-right trolls. This army was led by two groups known for fomenting swarms of hatred on professors: the far-right higher education blog Campus Reform, and Turning Point USA, the conservative college activist group that hosts the Professor Watch List, a sort of burn book for liberal faculty members across the country. Within hours, the messages turned from a steady drip into an outright deluge. I was receiving phone calls at my office and hundreds of emails in my work inbox, and reporters from far-right news organizations, and eventually local and national news organizations, were calling for quotes. Our university was targeted by the state and national Republican Party in an attempt to dry up alumni donations. I saw my name in the mouths of Twitter luminaries such as Sheriff David Clark and Kurt Schilling, who this queer boy from Idaho is told used to be a Boston Red Sox pitcher. Embedded in all of this hate were numerous threats, at least some of which were specific and credible enough for the university to deem my presence on campus too much of a risk.
"What's up, you fucking piece of shit, Trump-hating bitch? You think you're a fucking tough guy? Let's see how tough you are. Coming looking for you."
By the end of the week, I had been pulled from my classes and told not to return to campus until the threat level was sufficiently reduced. I would not return until the following semester. While the public awareness of my situation dimmed rather quickly, the effects of it lingered much longer, both for me and for others. My already diagnosed anxiety disorder ramped into overdrive, and I found myself hypervigilant, peering suspiciously out of my blinds at strangers walking by, like Miss Havisham on a bender. Even after the acute anxiety decreased, and I was able to spend a day at home without trying to will my hands to stop shaking, I still found myself unable to focus on complex tasks for any length of time. The unwanted advice that I received from my university's administration that I used the time off to focus on my writing went largely unheeded. I did watch a lot of television, though, knitted a blanket, and spent far too much time and money converting my basement into a haunted house for Halloween. There was a large and undeniably material effect of this moment on my own personal life, an effect that lingers today, popping up in moments when I expect it will, such as when I am forced to testify against a man who left me a threatening voicemail, and also when I don't expect it, such as when the Google alert I set up to keep track of the attacks against me lets me know that a sophomore student in Nebraska with my name has won another track and field event. The daily ritual of checking my university email has turned from one of rote annoyance into managed expectations and controlled breathing. 1 year removed from the beginning of this ordeal, my life is irrevocably and materially changed. There is no going back to normal, because this is what normal is now, and will be for quite some time. In our current digital and political environment, I often feel that we are encouraged to see each other as avatars. I don't know if this is a digital result of the increasing political polarity we are in, or if this polarization is the logical extension of a digital scape that converts us into screen names and profile pics. Or if there is a third explanation, independent of both. Perhaps the reason doesn't matter, although I suspect it does. All I know is that none of us is just us anymore. We are avatars for ideas, for moments, for political alignments, for straw men, for issues that are external to us and yet also deeply written into our bodies. Marginalized communities have known this forever. What else is the politics of respectability except an implicit recognition that the individual is an avatar for and a reflection of the whole community? In one sense, this is nothing new, even to those scholars who don't write from the perspective of the margins. Linguists and theorists have argued for eons that we only experience the world as a series of signifying markers, a great chain of signifiers that eternally defers full equivalency. As we have been introduced to each other digitally, our digital selves have become not just the calling card for our analog selves, but often the only real person with which others interact. But as we more consciously develop digital skins for our analog bodies, I worry about how we shift our perceptions of others into avataristic representations of themselves, rather than interacting with them as complex, flawed, and potentially redeemable human beings. A caveat. There are very real and valid safety reasons why someone might engage in this practice. As the Yes All Women movement showed, an individual man's personal history or reputation does not undo the potential for risk that his gender represents to women who have experienced daily, continual, and systematic harassment and violence at the hands of men. Men who have themselves been conditioned to think of women not as human beings, but as sexual conquests and playthings, as proprietary avatars of their fathers, brothers, husbands, and other men. In my own life, for example, I am particularly wary about straight, white, cisgender men because of what men who fit this profile have represented in my life. The attacks on me were made possible by my own Garrett-shaped avatar. During the public harassment campaign that targeted me, I received hundreds of messages on Facebook, email, Twitter, and more. Additionally, I was the subject of countless tweets and comments on social media, news articles, blogs, and more. In many of these, it was apparent that the concern that people on the internet had was not so much what I wrote, but what I represented. To these people, I represented the worst excesses of progressive social justice warriorism and the supposed bias of higher education. One person wrote to me to say, "I would say that you are an embarrassment to our educational system, however it seems that you are the norm. Academia is overloaded with socialist, communist, progressive indoctrination machines, hell-bent on the destruction of our once great representative republic. You would be more suited to teaching in North Korea, or maybe Iran. They would take care of you post-haste. Your parents must have been some kind of special. Maybe you were given too much Ritalin." Several others took pains to note that I am, quote, "what's wrong with the education system today," quote, "a crybaby communist," and more evidence of, quote, "hashtag libtard professors murdering hashtag free speech and crushing free thought." An image I had posted years earlier, wearing an ugly, thick blue scarf I had knitted, was suddenly passed around as evidence that I was an Antifa agitator. Other elements of my online identity were blended into this avatar, including my hyphenated Facebook name, apparent evidence of my emasculation at the hands of a non-existent wife, and what some assumed, correctly I might add, were my non-heterosexual tendencies. For this group of people, what I represented was both ideological and cultural identity. By attacking me, they were lobbing grenades at what they perceived to be a dangerously out-of-touch professoriate and liberal class. The avatar of me that developed during this event was a curious mix of ad hominem attacks, straw man fallacies, and hasty generalizations that congealed into something larger than the sum of their parts. In the process, I was both audience and spectator to my own attacks, incapable of defending myself, even if I wanted to, since the power of these messages came not from their words, but from their context, from the fact that they arrived in an avalanche of other similarly vicious and viscous smears that stuck to me and stung, regardless of whether I read them or not. The arrows were aimed at an effigy shaped like me, which they passed through on their way into my own flesh. This Garrett-shaped avatar, what I'm going to call the Garvatar, even though I'm now regretting saying that out loud, was also taken up by those outraged at what I was experiencing. While the right had set me up as an avatar of liberal histrionics, allies on the left worked together to erect another Garvatar, one who represented a professoriate and political community whose First Amendment rights and principles of academic freedom were under attack. The case of Garrett Nichols became, at least for a couple of days, another rallying cry in support of academic freedom, the importance of faculty unions, and, on my campus, the need for a strong administrative response to what was perceived as a coordinated attack on higher education from the political right. Colleagues at my institution and across the US wrote letters and signed online petitions. CNN reached out to interview me for a story on the trend of harassment of faculty, and the AAUP took up my case to pressure the administration to reverse my administrative leave. On campus, supportive students and colleagues reached out to offer their support and then decry the state of polarization in contemporary political discourse. In the years since then, I've spoken with more than one colleague who has told me that my experience motivated them to become more engaged with our union. Administrators at BSU put together events and committees for faculty to discuss academic freedom and difficult dialogues that took my own experience as a starting point without ever inviting me to participate in their development. The Garvatar was given a face when a colleague's sister designed a logo featuring a cartoon version of me that was emblazoned on buttons, stickers, and posters that still cover the campus to this day. I won't say that I'm not completely grateful for the support of my colleagues, both at BSU and at other institutions. It warmed my heart, and it was nice to get some positive attention to outweigh the negative. But the experience was as similarly disorienting as watching people attack a version of me that also wasn't me. As I saw my name, story, and image being deployed to make larger arguments about academic freedoms, I sometimes felt like a wallflower at my own party. This was partly because I had physically been removed from campus, so there was only so much I could do to help organize responses, and also because it was strategically better to allow others, especially those with the protections of tenure, to take up the fight on my behalf. Yet it was also because people had begun fighting on behalf of the Garvatar, and I felt an enormous internal and external pressure to take up that fight, too. Don't get me wrong, I am not one to turn down a professionally designed icon of my own face. But there is an intense interest by other academics and progressives in my own story, because of the ways in which my experience functions as a cautionary tale for others. This is not a tale I am immune to telling, and I believe it's a tale worth telling, if the lessons learned in my own debacle can help prevent another person from having to go through the personal hell that I did. But the effective experience of fighting on behalf of a version of yourself is a hard one to articulate. I am both profoundly grateful and profoundly bemused. There was a middle ground, though. During what I've taken to calling the semester when everything happened, I also received an incredible amount of support from colleagues, friends, and supporters who took it upon themselves to de-avatarize me, to articulate to a larger audience who I was as a person, not as a symbol, and in the process to proffer a defense of me that foregrounded my humanity rather than my symbolic virtue. In many of these examples, I am not the primary audience, though I cannot overstate the significance of seeing things like this publicly written about me. Yet neither do any of these examples contain the Garvatar. What I see is a portrait of myself, an incomplete portrait necessarily, but a portrait, not an avatar. The Garrett I see in this rhetoric is the Garrett that these people know, both professionally and personally. I see myself, or portions of myself, reflected back in these writings, and I recognize again my own humanity. In these letters, social media posts, and online comments, I remember again who I am, and can see myself not removed from the situation, but at least distinct from it. I am, through the rhetoric of others, and even if only for a moment, return to my own history. Having shared with you the experiences of my time as an avatar, I want to close by turning the tables somewhat. Or, to put it more accurately, to encourage us not to turn the tables. In the past year, I have found that I react much differently now to outrage online. Some of it has to do with the fact that we're all being forced to triage our outrage in the age of Trump. But I have noticed that when I am angry about something online, it feels differently than it did before. In part because the internet is chock full of avatars, and I just don't have time to be angry at avatars anymore. Take, for example, the recent trend in which white people have been filmed harassing and calling law enforcement on people of color for minor, or more frequently, made-up infractions, such as selling water without a permit, not presenting IDs to use at a community swimming pool, improper use of barbecue spaces, and whatnot. To be clear, the public harassment is not a new trend. These actions are born of the same kinds of logics designed to move Black people back into the prison industrial complex that earlier legal systems, such as the post-Reconstruction South's Black laws, did. What is new is the videotaping and the resultant memification of these white people, shared on social media in ways that are designed to go viral. Almost always, this includes the creation of alliterative pseudonyms for the offending white person, such as Permit Patty, Barbecue Becky, or Corner Store Caroline. You can probably see where I'm heading with this, so before I get there, I want to point out that these moments would not have happened if these white antagonists were not conditioned to see people of color not as individuals, but as avatars of racist conceptions of communities of color. The substitution of the individual for the whole community, the macrocosmic synecdoche of racism, permeates these interactions, displacing the humanity of the victim and forcing them to represent a poorly constructed vision of a larger group. Like I said earlier, this is nothing new. What is new, or at least what feels new to me in this moment, is the rhetorically weaponized redeployment of the avatar back onto the perpetrator. The series of nicknames effectively strips the offender of their individuality, mocking them for their tired and predictable participation in an ongoing history of white supremacy. By renaming them with generic Caucasoid names, such as Barbecue Becky or Golf Cart Gail, their actions are amplified, demonstrating for the audience that while these may be the actions of an individual, they are also examples of the systemic and dangerous bias that white communities have been leveraging against people of color for centuries. The nicknames are intended to work in this way as an effective rebuke of the individualized, "I'm not a racist" retort that so many white folk utter on a near daily basis, holding themselves at arm's length from associating with a system that privileges and supports them because of their race. In another sense, though, this avatarization may work against these aims. By re-identifying the offender as an avatar of white supremacy and white bureaucratic violence, the white person becomes white first and a person a very distant second. Their actions become the actions of a group, of an ideology, effectively stripping them of their humanity. When I mention their humanity, I want to be clear that I am not concerned with the humane treatment of these people, nor with forgiving or justifying their actions. I am concerned, rather, with the ways such an avatar allows them cover to skirt the consequences of their actions, consequences which their marginalized victims are not able to as easily avoid. As David Dennis argued recently, giving them nicknames is providing aliases that cover the names of real women with real racist motivations to commit real harm to real Black people. America has functioned under the premise that white women are innately innocent and harmless in the history of anti-Black violence, despite overwhelming historical and present-day evidence to the contrary. This is, of course, unfair, since marginalized people will always be seen as avatars of their communities, yet never be able to escape the consequences of these associations. But this is the pernicious power of privilege, which allows whiteness, quote, to take over as it takes cover, to paraphrase David Spur. Privilege always masks its identity, which is why it will gladly hide behind any mask, even one that is built to look exactly like the face beneath it. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, Audre Lorde teaches us, which is why I am suspicious that turning the tables back onto the oppressor in this manner accomplishes what we think it does. In developing these avatars, I wonder if we excuse the spectators of this violence, frequently well-meaning white liberals like myself, from seeing ourselves as complicit in this behavior. I mentioned earlier that I felt distanced from the avatar because it was both me and not me and difficult to address. But I also wonder whether the avatar has another distancing function for the audience. That by flattening the person in question, it discourages audiences or spectators from seeing themselves reflected in the image. When we see them as caricatures, we fail to see our potential reflected in their names and faces. I'm not a racist becomes I'm not a Becky, a substitution of one individualized denial for another, pushing a reckoning of our complicity down the road for another day. As I wrap up this address, I want to return to what I said at the outset. We are, all of us, human. In remembering our shared humanity, I hope that we remember what it means to be a human, to be fallible, to be cruel, to be confused, to be loved, to be hated. As we interact with each other, both online and in our analog spaces, I ask that we simply consider whether we've remembered the humans in front of us or on our screens. I'm not asking that we be kinder to one another. I honestly could not give a shit about that. Sometimes, social justice work requires that we be hot-headed assholes to one another. Sometimes, it requires and demands anger and wrath. So no, I'm not asking for kindness, because kindness doesn't always lead to change. But what if, just sometimes, we grounded our anger in the humanity of the offending person? What if our fury was directed at the human rather than at what they represented? Don't worry, we'll still have plenty of time to be pissed off at what they represent. When injustice has been done, we cannot serve justice when we allow the unjust to hide behind the masks that we carve for them. Foregrounding the humanity of our oppressors may be necessary to saving our own.